Jim Mooney, 247 Fighting Championships, head matchmaker. This guy right here is the reason that we have awesome fights. That's pretty much how it goes. And it's your first podcast. Is this your first podcast appearance?
On here, I don't know.
Like on this podcast?
Maybe.
I think it is. How?
I think it. Yeah, I think I was going to be on one of the first ones, and I had some technical issues. I don't recall what it was, but I just remember something about the restream, and it wasn't working out.
Yeah. Let me also say that I'm very jealous of you being in Austin, Texas, or wherever you are, in your very modern outdoor. It looks like you like founded a tech startup or something.
Yeah, it's my home away from home.
It's
down
definitely
on the beach in Corpus Christi.
Yeah, that is definitely not a fake background, ladies and gentlemen.
It is not.
No virtual backgrounds here. Jim Mooney is all real all the time.
Yeah, don't even think it.
So what's up, man? It's cool that you're finally on the podcast. Obviously, we've been working together for a while now. I've learned a ton from you. I will say the reason I wanted you on this episode, besides the fact that you were overdue to join the podcast in general, but I think matchmaking in terms of things that I didn't know before I got into the general manager position about MMA. You know, I covered MMA for so long with Bleacher Report, MMA Fighting, Flow Combat. I was at a ton of events, talked to a ton of fighters. I felt like I knew the game somewhat. I didn't at all. Like once I got into this position, you quickly find out that you really don't know anything about how this works. So I've learned a ton, but near or at the top of the list is definitely matchmaking and everything that goes into matchmaking. So I just wanted to get you on the show because I think a lot of people would be interested in the behind the scenes, like the secrets of matchmaking, kind of how matches come together, how matches fall apart. So I'll just start it there. Like for you, what was the learning process like coming from, because it's not like you go to college to be an MMA matchmaker, like you kind of learn it on the fly. So what was the learning curve like for you when you first started getting into it?
Well, I mean, I expected crazy hours, you know, with us being a new promotion when we first started. Ryan had somebody else that had started out doing the matchmaking, and then I took over right after our second card, July 19th. I was doing the fight day setup, and so I expected it to be crazy busy. The one thing that has really stood out to me, you know, this is going away from your question a little bit, but I wanted to make sure that because I had actually a customer in my day job. I got to talking to him. He overheard a conversation that I had, told him I had to step away, and you know, it was for one of the fights coming up. So he asked me about it, and I told him, like, as the conversation went along, he asked, like, what's the thing that really stands out for you and that you never expected? And I told him that it's not just levels to the fighters, but with the coaches and the coaching and the gyms and the dedication that these coaches and gym owners have to their team and to their fighters. It is nonstop. You know, we got the local coaches. I've talked to them and have said, like, you guys are crazy because most of you guys have day jobs, and you're coaching in the evenings, then you're traveling with your team on weekends. So you got weigh-ins on Fridays, you got fights on Saturdays. You might be prepping them for a grappling tournament. It just, like, it's crazy nonstop. And it opened my eyes that, you know, for me to think that, like, as busy as I was when I first took over, that there are people that are, like, I wouldn't say in over their head, but they are in it to a level where it's their lifestyle. That's just their life.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I think every time we talk about, you know, just to single one guy out, but it applies to almost all of them. Like you said, a lot of the coaches, a lot of the trainers, things like that. Isaac Greeley, like every time I think about that dude's schedule and everything he's doing, I think I said it on his podcast, like he does more than 24 hours in a day, it feels like his days have to be longer to do what he does. That's just what it seems like when you think about what he's doing. And then, like you said, to get into this, to dedicate your entire weekend, because that's like the other element of it. Is normally you think these people who work extremely hard, you work hard Monday through Friday, at least you have the weekends to recover. But in fighting, the weekends are when the bouts happen, and then Sunday is obviously a recovery day or a regrouping day, and sometimes there's competitions on Sundays as well. So the weekends aren't even a time to relax for these guys. So it's a wild grind all the way around. So I've definitely gained a lot of respect for these guys.
Yeah, Isaac is. So after that, ironically, after that service call, I had to go and get tires on my wife's vehicle. Went to a local tire shop in, where was it, Tarentum, just down the road and across the river from where the mat factory is. And it was the same situation. I'm sitting in the waiting area, and I got a phone call. I was talking with Ray Ross, Gorilla House, and didn't think I didn't think I was talking too loud. I was trying to talk softly, but there was a customer there, for the tire shop, getting tires on his vehicle. And after I was done, I sat down. It was just, at this point, once I sat down, it was just him and I in the waiting room. And he said, "Are you involved with MMA?" I said, "Yeah." So the conversation, picked up a little bit from there. And so he was actually coached by Isaac. I think he still trains at the mat factory. And he said, by the way, Gino, if you're watching this, what's up, Gino? Appreciate the conversation, getting to know you. But he said that he was with Isaac for like 17 years,
Wow.
coaching. And he said he got to learn a lot about wrestling just by watching him. And Isaac's the type of guy that he said if you weren't doing something right, he was going to hurt you. Not in a bad way, but it was going to get your attention, and you knew, don't make that mistake again.
Nice.
And Isaac's a young OG. And one of the comments that Gino made is, like, he is the youngest. What, he's in his mid 40s, 45, something like that.
Gotta be, yeah.
It looks like he could, step in the cage now.
Yep. Well, he works nonstop, not just career-wise, but literally working out-wise, training-wise. He's just a machine. So no secret. It's kind of funny, like every time people talk about they need tips for losing weight or tips for getting in shape, like exercise is pretty much always the answer, like for everything.
Yeah.
Like it's really not a secret. If you train, if anybody went out and trained as much as Isaac, like they would probably look younger and healthier as well. Like that's kind of not a secret. And he's been doing it his entire life, obviously, a standout collegiate wrestler at UPJ, and everything he's done, still competing at a very high level in grappling tournaments. So yeah, he's a machine, man.
Yeah. And, that's one of the things that really stands out to me about the Pittsburgh area coaches is, their fighters are going to come in and they're not going to gas. I understand that, somebody might have an adrenaline dump for different reasons, but that's different. That's, there's all kinds of reasons why that could happen. But in general, when it comes to the physical readiness and the motor to keep going, for the full, 3 minutes, if it's advanced amateurs, 3 rounds, 5 minutes, 3 rounds for the pros, their tank is going to be pretty close to empty, at the end of the fight, because they're not going to leave anything left, to the imagination. And it's just nonstop motorboat with the Pittsburgh fighters.
Yeah, it's super true. And just to for people listening who maybe aren't familiar with the matching process at all, like the reason we're talking about coaches at all is because all matching goes through the coaches, like you or managers. If a lot of pros will have you go through the manager instead of their coach, but even some amateurs nowadays have managers as well. But it's either a coach or a manager who actually confirms the matchup and gets things rolling. So we work more with coaches than fighters themselves for matching purposes. It's just it's a really interesting process. I'll say, like, learning the ins and outs of things. I'll give you an example here to kind of speak on. Like, we're trying to match a fighter right now who is 1-0, but has a very distinguished background in collegiate boxing. He was a standout collegiate boxer and also is picking up grappling extremely fast. So he's 1-0 as an amateur fighter, which in Pennsylvania qualifies him only for novice rules. So novice rules, for people just catching up, like, there's a novice amateur division, there's an advanced amateur division. You qualify for advanced amateur after 3 fights with a winning record. So it's kind of like advanced amateur. I mean, it's what it says. Like, it's the better amateur fighters, more experienced amateur fighters. So this fighter, this 1-0 fighter with the standout collegiate background, has to fight novice amateur based on his experience, but probably has the skills to be an advanced amateur. So this is like where matchmaking gets incredibly tricky in Pennsylvania, especially because we need to find somebody who either is an advanced amateur just willing to fight under novice rules. Like, that is an option, but they never are because everybody wants to fight advanced amateur, which I totally understand. The rules are a little different. They all prefer fighting under advanced amateur rules. So an advanced amateur fighting novice isn't really on the table, even though technically it is. So secondarily, you need to find somebody who is like 2-0 and also has a good background and will fight this guy. It's like an impossible to find match. So there's all these little elements of like, why can't you just go out and find somebody? Hey, fighter A, fighter B, go fight each other. Like, it's just not that easy. So that's just one example. But for you, Jim, like, how do you navigate all these little tricky ins and outs? Because it seems like every bout has something to it.
Yeah. So like one of the first things I'll do is see if I can find video on the guy, because I want to scout them as much as possible. And I know that you and Danny do this also. But, I want to make sure that when we send a name to a coach for them to consider about, we don't want them to look at it and think, like, I just spent 5 minutes researching this potential matchup, and it's a whitewash. You're bringing, my guy in, for the slaughter for your hometown guy, and we're not down with that. So you really have to do your homework, so to speak, and make sure that what you're feeding to coaches are appropriate bouts. And that's I found myself using that word a lot lately. And as I look back in some of my messaging and the searches when I do filters, I've been coming across that word a lot. And, it's asking coaches what the full combat sports background is, for their fighters, so that we can make sure that we have an appropriate matchup for them. Yeah, it's way more than just, looking for a debut guy. So now I have to find another debut guy, but it could be, D1 wrestler who, maybe just started. Like, we're the perfect example for the July 9th card. D1 wrestler who just got started with MMA. And, sometimes with those situations, you don't know what the cage is going to do to them, and, is it going to hinder them? But it adds something to the matching that I like. And it's, the challenge in trying to find, I wouldn't call it, impossible, but you've got to, really put the time in and make sure that when you put these bouts together, that they're not, slobber knockers, and it ends, after 50 seconds of the first round.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a worst case scenario. People might think that, like, that's good. On one level, it's good for the promotion in terms of a highlight and things like that. It's everybody likes a quick knockout or a quick finish. Like, obviously it makes a good shareable poppy highlight, but in terms of our matchmaking, like, that's really never something that we want to do, like, at all. We want the most competitive matchups possible. And actually, people notice, like, I've heard people make the comment that Pittsburgh fighters lose a lot on our cards. Like, we don't always set up the home team to win. Like, people think like that's how it's done, but that's just not how it's done at all. We want the most competitive, the most fair matchups possible on every level. And that goes from novice, amateur, all the way up to our professional matchups. So it's an interesting dynamic there. And like you said, a guy coming in with a D1 wrestling background, is that an advantage? Like, absolutely, that's an advantage, but it's not like every D1 wrestler that ever stepped into the cage won every fight. You know, it's not the be all end all. And when you're talking about an amateur debut who's been training MMA for just a couple months at that point, in this example, you truly have no idea what you're getting there. So it's very cool whenever somebody steps up to that challenge, like Derek Brown did in that. I mean, we're obviously talking about James Alito and Derek Brown, so we'll just throw that out there. Um, like Derek Brown, when he did step up to the challenge there and take that fight, and like these are the moments when I think, me personally, I won't speak for you. I'm sure it's the same for you, though. Like, I gain a lot of respect for these fighters that are just down to fight. Like, we threw a lot of names at Derek Brown,
Yeah.
and he was a debut fighter, and every time he just said, yes, 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 yes. Like, dude, I literally just want to fight. A lot of guys say they're like that, but not every guy is like that. So Derek Brown is truly like that. And that, you know, it makes our job easier. But now, you know, James Alito definitely took it to him in that fight, and he acknowledged, Derek Brown acknowledged, you know, some weaknesses in his game. So like his next bout out, now we have a better perspective of like where his skill set's at, what kind of fighter he needs to match up with, and we can adjust accordingly. But yeah, whenever you're looking at two debut amateurs, man, those are toss-ups all the time, regardless of their background. And that's why it is important to talk to the coaches and get as much info as possible and trust the coaches. That's one thing that I'll say has been huge to me in terms of the Pittsburgh coaches, and honestly all the coaches that we work with, the out of town coaches as well, the blue corners, like creating that dialogue where you're having honest conversations about how good your fighters are is so crucial. Their belt ranks, any other experience, you know, if they've had boxing bouts or kickboxing bouts or things like that, like you have to have an honest dialogue, or else if you don't, that's when you get the true squash matches that just look terrible.
Mhm.
So avoiding that, yeah, I mean, you got to avoid that.
You know, the when it comes to the debut bouts, the outcome in a lot of cases, I would say in most cases, is really negligible on the fighter that wins and the fighter that loses. And if you know, if you got a good coach, he's going to be able to, or she is going to be able to keep their fighters' ego and head in check and make sure that, you know, they just look at that as a positive experience. And I remember talking, you know, years ago when Ryan and I did the podcast. We had a fighter on, and one of the things that he said he always did is he would go back and watch his losses, and he would really study them to see, you know, what he was doing wrong that allowed his opponent to gain the advantage. And it's not necessarily that he was taking anything away. He just looked
Mhm.
at his performance as, you know, what areas he needed to work on. And, you know, he's a coach in the Pittsburgh area, but yeah, if you got a good coach, then, you know, it's going to show up in the second fight, the third fight, and as they're progressing, you know, through the up to in PA with the advanced level amateurs, and then on into the pro career. But
Yeah.
it's, yeah, we don't. It's no good for anybody. For us, for the fighters, you know, whether it's in a hometown or team coming in, for us to put on a squash match, because, you know, they're not going to want to come back, and, you know, they're going to lose our trust if all we're doing is putting on fights for the hometown fans.
Yep, exactly. I mean, there's just no point in that. And besides, like, there's so many amazing matchups to put on. Like, I think anybody who's been to an event and seen these like fight of the night type performances, and when a fight like that is happening and you feel the energy in the arena, like that's why you put on fights like that. There's no feeling quite like a fight that is just awesome and everybody's losing their mind together, and just every punch gets like the momentum built. It's like a snowball effect. Like a good fight gets better as it goes because you just can't believe what you're seeing. Like these are the fights for sure that we get excited to put on. And I think we have quite a few coming up, man. I got to say, I want to transition just to the Brawl in the Berg 13 card for a second, because we do have two pro fights announced on that, and they're bangers. Like, you talk about setting up fights where we don't set up Pittsburgh guys to win or the red corner to win. These two pro fights are perfect examples. These blue corner opponents are as legit as they come, and these are going to be incredible fights. So we'll start at the top with Ethan Goss, our 247 FC pro featherweight champion, is going to take on Tobias Taylor out of Ohio. And Tobias is an animal. Like, when you look at this fight, Jim, what gets you excited besides the fact, it's a pro title fight? That's pretty exciting anyway. But what do you love about the matchmaking here?
Well, I don't know a whole lot about Tobias, but I do know, he's coming off of 2 consecutive wins. It's somebody that was actually on Ethan Goss's list, when we've tried to match him in the past. And even, this is before Ethan won the title. And so we had followed Tobias for a little bit and had pitched the bout to him. He loved it. He, wanted the title fight, but he was upfront with us and said that he had, a fight coming up, and he was pretty confident, said, after this win, I want that title shot. So we put, so some behind the scenes info here is we put that bout together, knowing that Tobias, was already contracted for another fight. It was outside of our 45-day clause, where somebody, we don't want them to fight inside of that to, protect our card. And he was, so we put that clause in there. He's got to, come in to the title fight on a win, or he's, not eligible for the belt. And I think we may have written it up that we could rewrite or rescind that contract. Mm-hmm. But he was committed 100%. And Ethan had been saying for a while, he wants the top opponents, he wants the tough guys, and he wants to show that, don't look at his record and think that he's a middle of the road guy. And he fought some tough opponents, made some mistakes early in his career, and the guy's on a tear now. I think he's had one bad outing where he wished he could get that back. But like this one, I think is going to go back and forth, and both guys don't want it to go to the cards. I'm not gonna go up on a limb and pick a winner here, but I see it going the distance, and it's our main event, and people are gonna look back on this and say, hey, I remember when.
Yeah,
talking about both these guys.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the most interesting things about this fight, it's kind of with Tobias, it's 2 layered things that really stand out to me with his record, is that his losses, he's 5-4 as a pro. All 4 of his losses are to really elite competition, like Patchy Mix early on, who's literally one of the top bantamweights in the world in Bellator right now. Isaiah Chapman, who, rest in peace, his life was ended way too soon. He was 9-4 as a pro, and also like 3-1 in his last 4 fights at the time. He was on an absolute tear himself. Jarrell Hodge, who I've always said one of the top local fighters that we've had in the area, and he's been doing it for so long and is just an absolute beast. And then Chris Humes Mitchell ended his pro career 3-1, ended on a loss, unfortunately, but he was a really promising pro fighter that kind of looked like he cut it short as well. And it's just, when you look at guys, one thing I always do is look at their losses, like who are they losing to? And with Tobias, it's very clear that he only loses to super elite competition. And now the benefit of that is that all of these fights happened earlier in his career. Now, like you said, he's on a tear, and it's exactly Ethan Goss. So that's the second layer that is interesting to me. Like, him and Ethan have followed a similar path where they took extremely hard fights all throughout their career, took some losses as a result, but now they're both riding really good winning streaks and kind of finding their groove as pros. So this is truly a matchup of 2 guys who are not only, longtime veterans, can finish the fight anywhere, really well-rounded, all of that stuff because of their tough competition earlier in their career. But now they're also piecing it together and getting better and better and better and better every time out. I mean, the Ethan Goss we saw against Kevin Barberina would have crushed the Ethan Goss we saw against Skylar Sutho. And that Ethan Goss would have crushed the Ethan Goss we saw before that. Like, it's very clear each fight that Ethan is just improving each time out. So, and ditto for Tobias. So that's really exciting because you just don't know exactly what's going to happen. Like, you can look at a lot of film and research these guys a lot, but you can't predict how much better they got in the meantime because they are taking these leaps. So that's what's really exciting about that fight for me.
Yeah,
And
the two other names on Tobias's resume are his last. I believe it was his last. Let me take a look. His last amateur bout. It was against Adley Edwards. Adley Edwards was supposed to fight on. I want to say this was 2020 maybe, where he was supposed to fight on Contender Series for Dana White's fight in, and he ended up getting injured just before that bout went off, and he had to withdraw. And subsequently, yeah, I think he was out of the cage for a decent period. And he's now a Bellator fighter. And there were a couple times when I think we were trying to match Ethan and Adley was available, and for different reasons, that bout could never come together. And so that bout there's still potential there for Ethan and Adley down the road, and pending the outcome of this and what Ethan and Gorilla House have in store for him. But these two guys both have impressive resume.
For a little more context on Adley Edwards, I just pulled up his page. That Contender Series bout was in July 2019, and it was actually against Terrence McKinney, who is doing extremely well in the UFC right now. I think he's like 3-1 or something like that in the UFC. So that would have been an absolute banger. But after that, he won 3 fights, and he just lost to Aaron Pico in the 3rd round in April, it looks like, April 15th. So he's 9-2 as a pro, though, and that is an amazing record, obviously, as a pro. And his only loss as an amateur was to Tobias Taylor. So Adley Edwards is super legit, and Tobias wiped him out, actually knocked him out. So, yeah, I mean, Tobias's resume is nuts. It really is. It's easy to look at somebody and say, oh, he's 5-4. Like, that's not impressive. But when you really look at it, it's actually super impressive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an absolute banger. And then the next one down, the other pro fight we announced, Justin Patton versus Rico Talley. This one's nuts. I mean, everybody who knows MMA will recognize the gym Rufus Sport, and that's where Rico Talley trains out of. 3-1 as a pro. He's on a heater as well. His career's really taking off. This is no layup for Justin Patton at all, which what else would we expect from him at this point?
Justin Patton, he's going to bring it every single time. And I was talking to Ryan about this. I think this was before the July 9th card. And I knew that he had been on our cards a lot. I didn't realize he had fought so much for us. So he's got this will be his 6th bout, I believe, with us. And I think we had him, I want to say he was matched for the was it the COVID card also, but Justin will take on anybody you put in front of him. And his coaches are going to have him ready, and he's ready to I think have a breakout fight. I'm not going to say what I think the outcome is going to be here because I have a ton of respect for Rico, but this is going to be another fight to watch. And the same thing that I said about Goss and Tobias, that you're going to look back on this and say, I saw that fight, or I was there, or, I saw these two guys in the beginning of their careers, and it's going to be a fun one to watch. And that's going to cap off the night.
Oh, yeah. I mean, these two at the top of the card are just nuts. And one thing that I look at Rico and I look at Justin Patton, and a common theme with them, just like Goss and Tobias, is that they take hard fights. They both open their pro careers with losses that have aged well against very tough opponents. And then they're finding their way from there. Justin just evened up his record at 2-2 at Brawl in the Berg 12 with that dominant win. By far, I mean, I would say that's the best he's looked as a pro and probably ever in his MMA career, honestly. It's like he looked like a different kind of animal in that fight against Niaz, and that makes me extremely excited to see what he's going to do against Rico Talley, because we know Rico's going to bring it. Everything I've seen from Rico, an incredible fighter, incredible gym, incredible preparation. He's been a guy who's on social media, like, extremely excited about this fight, has a ton of support. Like, go check out the comments on his Instagram page when you get a chance. Like, he has a ton of supporters and a ton of hype, and he thinks the sky's the limit for his career. You know, he's looking Bellator, UFC. He's going top for it. So I love guys like that. I love guys that are setting those kind of goals for themselves. And this is kind of the perfect matchup for both of these guys at this stage in their career. And I think the really cool thing about it is that whoever loses this fight is going to only get better from it. I think both of these guys know how to rebound from losses extremely well, learn from losses extremely well. Like, neither one of these guys is going to get hung up on a loss by any means. So it's just a good experience as well. You know, this is normally something we talk about more with amateurs, where it's like, get in there, get the experience. Your win-loss record resets when you turn pro. Like, it really doesn't matter if you lose as an amateur, as long as you're getting experience and learning. As a pro, obviously, that tune changes a little bit. There's money involved. There's, future opportunities involved. But at the same time, Rico and Justin both strike me as guys who are still in it for the experience as well, and are going to use that to get better as fighters. So win or lose, man, this one's a banger on both sides. And I think with those two pro fights at the top of this card, and more to come, we're not going to drop any breaking bouts on this podcast, but there are a lot more fights to come for Brawl in the Berg 13 that you guys are going to love. But those two at the top kind of solidifies the quality of that card, in my opinion. Like, we got those two at the top. We fill it out from there. This is a banger of a card, honestly.
So before we go any further, we talked in the beginning about how we don't want to put on squash bouts. And so, Justin, I love you. I know you're watching, but and I'm not picking on you, brother, I promise. But so if you look at Justin, this is going to be his sixth fight for us. He's 2-3 for us. And he's lost by finish. He's been subbed, I think, 2 times. Yeah, 2 of his losses were by subs. And this is a guy that had a pretty good amateur career, and all but one of his wins were by subs. He was a guy that would finish you. And, so he is proof that, like, we don't just try to put on bouts and please the hometown crowd, and we only want the hometown team to win, or the red corner to win. We want competitive fights, and I guess you could say we're pulling a little bit for the red corner, but that's not really true, because in the matching process we get to know the other side, and you start to talk to them, and you can get to know them on a personal level, and you get to know their coaches and what's going on behind the scenes, their progression into the sport. So there's a whole element of the matching that I didn't even imagine would have been there. But Justin is a perfect example of what we try to do, and that's put on competitive fights. Every fight we want to be competitive, and this is going to be another one of those cards.
Yeah, and truly, can easily throw Ethan into that mix as well, in terms of always wanting competitive, tough fights. And plus, Ethan's the champ. Like, there are no easy fights. There's no easy pro fights anyway, but there are especially no easy pro title fights, because, like you said, we only give title shots to guys with winning records coming off wins. Like, we want your resume to look good. We want you to earn a title shot, even if it's not quite like the UFC, where, you win 6 fights in the UFC and then get your title shot. Like, we want you to have a strong resume coming in nonetheless to really earn that. Especially, Ryan says it all the time, but we don't throw our belts around just to do it. That doesn't make any sense. We want our title fights to actually mean something. And if you earn a 247 Fighting Championships belt, that means you are the top dog. That means that you earned it, and for good reason. So Ethan certainly did, and now he's going to have to defend it against a tough fighter. And Tobias Taylor too. Like, that defense matters big time. And if Tobias beats Ethan, obviously he has earned that strap. So Ethan and Tobias are both guys as well. You know, they're looking at Bellator, they're looking at the UFC. You don't get there by just beating anybody. We can't throw me in there against Ethan and let him beat up on me. Like, all right, UFC, he got another finish, you know?
I'm sending over a contract now.
Yes. Send location. But yeah, I mean, you got to earn these title fights, especially. So they have, you know, Justin Patton, Rico Talley. I see nothing but good things in their futures as well. Win or lose, those two fights are just nuts. And I'm really proud of those two to headline this Brawl in the Berg 13 card October 1st at the Monroeville Convention Center. We have a whole lot of fights left that we're not going to talk about today. but you guys stay tuned to our social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We'll be announcing fights, and obviously on the podcast, we're going to be talking to the fighters involved and also talking about these fights. So subscribe to the podcast. We're all over the place. I'm not going to let you go yet, though, Jim, because there are at least a few more things I wanted to get into. But at the top of it, I just want to talk about matching amateur fights in general, because there is this idea, kind of like we said earlier. I mentioned it in passing, but I wanted to dig into this idea a little more because there are two schools of thought, and I understand both of them. And I still don't know how I feel about either of them, because it's such a pro-con kind of situation where your record does reset when you're a pro. Whether you're 1-12 as an amateur, whatever, or 6-0 amateur champion, it doesn't really matter. When you turn pro, it resets to 0-0 for everybody. How do you feel about amateur fighters that are picky about their bouts versus guys who just come in and are like, I will literally fight anybody. I just want the experience. I want to go pro someday. I'm here for cage time. Because it's interesting. You're not making money as an amateur besides ticket sales, but there's two schools of thought. Like, do you want to look 6-0, or do you want to be 5-4 with really good experience on your resume? How do you feel about that dynamic? I'm sure you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So I'll start with when I was younger. I still have the mindset and think that I'm an athlete and can go out and perform like I did. I don't know how many years ago, but I know physically I can't. But the mentality, you know, stays with you for a long time. And one of the things I remember vividly is it was just that, you know, it wasn't like a pickup league, but it was I was playing deck hockey. This is going back, at this point, it's probably like 25 years ago. And the guy that owned this league and this deck court, he was putting together a traveling team. And I'd never given it any thought. I'd always, you know, believed in myself and thought that I could hang with anybody and that I was the best at whatever position I was playing. And, you know, I was goalie. So he asked me if I wanted to play, but he said, I don't want you, you know, as our goalie. I want you to play center for us. I'm like, well, okay, I can do that. But, you know, like, we just finished, it's like a 20 or 22 game season. And so if it was 22 games, I played goalie 19 of them. It was that dominant. So I was like, okay, well, I'll do it. And the first game that we had, so there was like a month of practices leading up to this national tournament. And the level of just the practices versus the league that I was playing in was crazy different. It was such a higher level just in practice. And then once we got to the first game, it was even higher than what I experienced in practice. But what I realized is that when I'm facing the best, that I could push myself, and I knew that I could compete at that level and that I belonged there. And so I take that mindset, and when I see guys that are picky about it, that's what I think. Like, push yourself. Don't just sit back and think, what if I take a loss? Because at this point of your career, it's not going to matter. And even to some extent, once you get into like the beginning stages of your pro career, you need to really work on your game to set yourself apart. And it's more than just a fight. You got to push yourself in practice, when you're rolling with your teammates, because if you don't, when you're put in that situation where you can feel your opponent going to another level, you got to be able to figure out how to get there at the same time.
Yep.
So I'm on the side where I wouldn't say you take every bout that comes your way. To some extent, you got to be a little picky and know where you're at, not just take a fight just to take a fight. But you can't be afraid to take a fight because you don't want to damage your record. And go for the experience, improve on your talent, not just your physical talent, but your mental toughness as well.
Yeah.
So, and we see it every single matching period. Multiple
And it's
times.
obviously important to note, we're not naive to the fact that it's a lot easier for us to say this when we're not the ones getting in the cage and getting punched and taken down. Of course, it's easy for us to be like, listen, do it for the experience, amateurs. You just need to get in there and get some experience. But there is some merit to it. And I wouldn't feel as comfortable saying it if I didn't talk to, Comma Worthy, Ethan Goss, these pros who are doing it at a super high level. And that's what they did. And that's what they would recommend as well. So it's not just us, there's something to it for the experience. You can always tell these amateurs, especially when they turn pro, you can tell the amateurs that had extremely competitive amateur careers because they're ready. They don't look shell shocked when they get in there, they turn pro, just off the top of my head too, since we were talking about Gorilla House earlier, like all of Gorilla House's fighters are like this, first of all, but Cam Allgaier and Sidney Ross, when they turn pro, they're going to be ready. There's no doubt in my mind. Like they've fought the best of the best already as amateurs. Those are two amateurs who could definitely be pros right now.
Ray and Darren kill those guys. And, when, and girls, sorry, Sid. But yeah, that's another gym. Ray has told me a couple times, when he was getting Ethan ready for his first title bout, he told me that they murdered him and Darren beat the crap out of him. And Ethan will tell you, they took it to me, but that's what he wanted. He said that's what he needed, and that's what pushed him on to win that title. But yeah, to go ahead and finish your point. I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
No, you didn't steal it at all. I think that was just my point. Like you look at Sid and Cam Allgaier, they're really good examples of what we talked about. Sid has taken a few losses in her amateur career. She's 6-4, so she's no stranger to losing. Obviously, no stranger to winning either. But it's all built her up to this position where she is ready to turn pro. And ditto for Cam. He fought Hunter Starner in his last fight, and they were both 6-0. So these were two hyper, mega, ultra prospects on the amateur level. That's like one of my favorite fights that you've ever put together, by the way. So kudos on that one. Like that is as good as it gets to me because you just don't see two amateur prospects at that level willing to give up that and one of them had to, and it ended up being an incredibly competitive, and to me both guys raised their stock in that fight. Like even though Cam ultimately lost, I thought higher of him afterwards than beforehand. Even as a fighter, I was like, I knew Cam was very good, obviously, but in that fight he proved he's pretty damn great, man. Like I still think if Cam, sticks to it and wants to make a pro career out of this, he's going to be incredibly successful. He's one of the most talented guys we have on the local scene, in my opinion. So, yeah, when you take fights like that, in my eyes, there's just no losing. That's kind of what it comes down to. Like technically, yes, Cam is 6-1 now, but that doesn't matter to me. Like I literally think more highly of him as a fighter because he took that test against Hunter Starner. So that's the other side of it.
Yeah, and then when you run into fights like that and fighters that you bring together, you were already a fan of the local fighter, and now you're watching a career of another what we see as a star in the making and somebody that's going to become a household name, in a relatively short amount of time. That bout, I don't know how much I can go into what it took to actually get that bout approved, but I know like these are like the behind the scenes. I know I've mentioned to you before, I've said this to Ryan and Danny. The police have their ride-alongs. And if there was some way that we could do like a match along where, a fan comes and sits with us.
Match along. I like that.
It would be an hour. And
Yeah.
they would be blown away by what you got to go through. And like that fight in particular, if we put down some paperwork in front of them and some emails, and they saw what it took to actually get that fight on the card, they'd be blown away. And that's just one fight.
Yeah. So here, kind of like I said at the top of the show, like I wanted to share some of the behind the scenes, if you will, of matching. I'm not going to reveal any secrets or anything like that, but this is a perfect example. This is one of those times where, so I talked about a little bit with the novice amateur. I was talking about that collegiate boxer that we're trying to match. That's difficult to match because of some technicalities, but Hunter Starner is a really good example of a different technicality. So he was 6-0 heading into that bout with Cam Allgaier. If you look on Tapology, he was 6-0. But if you look at the official database that everybody uses, he was only 2-0 in officially sanctioned fights. Now, there is a difference between these officially sanctioned fights, non-registered bouts. So you can't just say, well, somebody's 6-0. Like, what matters is the database. So that is the hurdle, I'm sure, that you had to work through. I don't remember working through that with you or being involved in that at all. You kind of just took that one on and did it, and obviously got it done. But these are the things that people don't see that I did want to talk about on the podcast, because it's like I said, I thought I understood MMA. I thought I understood matching. There are so many freaking hoops to jump through and so much more behind the scenes that you don't see to get to fight night. To have an MMA event and to have it happen and have a full card, it's a lot, man. And it's actually amazing that it ever happens, let alone, regularly, like the groove we're in now, which obviously I'm very proud of. So, yeah. So the officially sanctioned fight, like that's just another layer, along with the novice versus advanced rules versus all that, another layer to the puzzle that, like, Hunter Starner technically was 2-0 going into that fight, even though he was 6-0. Like, these are the things we got to deal with.
Yeah. So there was another fight, and I don't know, like one of them today could be 1A and the other could be 1B. I'm talking about the Hunter Starner fight. And then this other fight where we had to deal with NYSAC, New York State Athletic Commission. Tomorrow they could flip-flop, talking about like the toughest things we had to do to get a fight actually on the card and approved. And so the situation with NYSAC, just to make a long story short, we had a fighter that had a suspension, and he was told that it was supposed to be a 30-day suspension, which would have been standard for something that he had received during his fight. And I think he had like a cut under his eye or over his eye, something like that. And but like as time went along, NYSAC added time on to his suspension. So his 30 days ran up before the bout. So it was clear, but they had an indefinite. And there were some things that we had to do in talking with, making contacts and actually trying to get hold of somebody with NYSAC it was like trying to find water in the desert. We found it. And I'm not going to mention his name, but there was a NYSAC official that we were communicating with. And in the end, he told us that we were the very first. He said, nobody's ever been able to do this before. But with some working together with NYSAC and the fighter and his doctor and the doctor's office, that we were able to get NYSAC to lift the suspension early, actually. And I think it ended up being 90 days, but they lifted it early. And, they reiterated, like, we've never done this before. So I don't know what you guys did or like what kind of pool you have, but, just consider yourselves lucky. And that fight was a
Mhm.
tremendous fight. I mean, you remember
It
what
was
happened in the
amazing.
first round.
I definitely remember the fighter, this whole situation. I was
Yeah.
involved in that one, so it's just like for people listening that thinks that maybe it was like, wow, did you get somebody with a concussion cleared or something? Like, no, it really what we got taken care of was not a big deal and shouldn't have been there. It was actually like a technical error, in my opinion.
Mhm.
And we literally just had to get them to see our side. So it was like a lot of back and forth, a lot of being very polite, breaking things down, making sure everybody's on the same page. Like we just went into it with very reasonable level heads and they saw it our way, thankfully. So yeah, that I can't believe that that actually happened. I'm glad it did. That, like you said, that was a banger of a fight, which
Mhm.
we knew it was going to be. That was another one that when we booked it, we were like, oh yeah, like like this is going to be good.
Yeah. So
So
one
yeah,
other thing I wanted to point out is like this ended up being nothing, but these are like some things that we deal with, and you don't know this stuff is happening when you are just walking through the gates or the doors, and you give somebody your ticket and you go sit down. So early in the matching period for this fight, and I'll name the fighter Craig Perry. I don't even know if Craig knows about this. So Craig, listen in. When we were originally matching Craig Perry, um, there was somebody that we sent his tapology to, his like fighter history, and he showed up in the database, or not in the database, but he showed up on tapology as being 2-0, and the coach responded, is he going to be able, how's he going to make 135? He's 170. And I went and looked at it, because like I just have saves, files for each of the fighters, and I can quickly do a copy and then paste it into the message for the coaching. So there was no need for me to look at it. And once he said that, I looked at it, and it showed that he was, I believe he was 2-0, but his last bout was in Florida, and he fought at 170.
Hmm.
So I think I messaged Craig, and maybe I did, yeah. But so we ended up having to, we have a contact that does some editing and contributes to Tapology, so they were able to get that squared away. And oh no, so he was showing up as 0-3, I believe. Yeah, that's what it was. The other one was, I believe it was Elijah Davis. Elijah was showing up as 2-0. Yeah, so
That's
so
really
our friend,
interesting.
yeah,
What's funny, I'm actually looking at Craig's tapology right now, and he has it still says, look at this, weight class welterweight.
yeah,
To be clear, Craig Perry is not a welterweight, ladies and
no.
gentlemen.
Maybe after he gets out of the water with full clothes on.
Maybe.
No,
And even then, I'm not sure. I might still take the under.
yeah. So, but yeah,
Really promising
just little
here.
things like that we encounter, and you don't think it's going to be a big deal, but it is. Areas all
Yeah,
the time that you run into on Tapology, and sometimes you don't even know that you're looking at it, and it might turn us away from looking at that fighter again to potentially
right,
bring them in.
right.
So, but that's part
So
of doing your homework and seeing what's out there, and making sure that we put together appropriate bouts and get all the information we can.
exactly.
There's that word again.
Yep, yep, exactly.
Every day.
So I want to end the podcast with this. I'm obviously going to plug something. We have a future fighter form. So if you want to make our job easy, matchmaking, fill out our future fighter form. If you guys want to fight for us, it's right on our website, 247fighting.com. There's this little about tab right here. Go about future fighter form. Boom, it'll bring you here. And then it's just a little questionnaire you fill out. So this makes it easy. Choose your fight weight, a lot of info, like we said, your record, boxing, BJJ, grappling, other weights you'd fight at, what rank you are in jiu-jitsu, all that stuff is there. So if you want to fight for us, make our job easy, throw your name in the hat. Like that's the easiest way to do it. And then we'll get in touch with your coach and take it from there. So that I will end with that. And I think we still have this. I'm feeling like this should be kind of a recurring episode, Jim, because there's so much behind the scenes in matching that literally we could probably talk about this for like 6 hours straight. Honestly, we could just bring up different case studies and things like that and things that have happened we didn't even talk about, and we're not going to right now because this is already approaching an hour long podcast, but we didn't even talk about losing fights on fight week or
Oh,
last minute replacement fights, anything like
I'd
that,
rather
which
not.
happens. Yeah, which happens every time and is the ultimate scramble for any promotion. So we'll get into that next time. But I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. And, I always love these behind the scenes ones because, like I said, I started my MMA journey as a fan. You started as a fan. You think you know a lot about the game, but like this is the stuff
You
that
might.
you do
Yeah.
not know. Yeah. Yeah. You might know a lot about like the UFC roster and things like that. But in terms of organizing an event, dealing with a commission, dealing with coaches, dealing with fighters, the technicalities behind the scenes, it is so layered, man. And it's been honestly really exciting for me to learn it all and to learn it from you, the best matchmaker in the area. I said it. He's the best in the area. We got the best. That's why our fights are awesome. So we're honored to have you, Jim. And I know we got a lot of good fights coming down the pipe. So
Hey,
let's
Danny's right on
keep it
my
rolling.
heels, so
Dude, Danny Palm. See, we're gonna bring Danny Palm in the next
yeah.
time. I was kind of hush hush on Danny Palm in this podcast because I want him to make his own debut appearance like you just did. So Danny Palm's going to get his shine. Don't worry, Danny Palm. We're going to get to you too, because like you said, he's really hit the ground running and he's getting better and better every show at this. So that's awesome. All right, guys. So that is this week's episode. Go subscribe to us. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, pretty much anywhere that you want to watch a podcast. We are there. And we have a very exciting new podcast studio coming for you guys. And I can't wait for you to see it and experience it. This whole podcast, you're not even going to recognize what we're doing right now. Jim, unfortunately, you're going to have to get out of your tech savvy Austin, Texas home.
Why would I
there.
want to leave this place? I mean, come on, look at it.
Hey, the studio's nice too. We might be able to convince you when you see this place. So we'll get that rolling, and then we'll see you guys next week. Brawlenberg 13. Obviously, we talked about the 2 pro fights at the top. There are going to be many, many more fights being announced very soon. October 1st, the Monroeville Convention Center. Tickets are on sale now at 247fighting.com. Go get them, ladies and gentlemen, and we will see you